Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon, and today I'm talking with economist and writer Tom Luongo. Tom is a former research chemist, a staunch libertarian. He currently publishes his blog, Gold, Goats, and Guns, and a monthly investment letter focused on geopolitics, commodities, and cryptocurrencies. He's also been published by numerous outlets like Zerohedge, Russia Insider, Lou Rockwell, and investing.com. The subject of today's interview, on March 27th, is Trump's recent cabinet shuffle. His neoconservative war cabinet, perhaps? Or is it a brinksmanship cabinet that leads to a grand bargain in the Middle East and Korea, as suggested by Alastair Crooke in his recent analysis at Strategic Culture Foundation? And here is that interview. Hi, Tom. Welcome to Around the Empire. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Joanne. Appreciate the invite.
I should tell our audience that the reason why we're doing this podcast is because we have a mutual friend, completely unrelated to any of this, who noticed that we might have similar foreign policy and war views and said, hey, you guys should talk to each other. That's why I caught a few of your interviews and podcasts or video broadcasts.
Right.
And your recent one, because I'm completely... I don't know. I'm perplexed about the recent cabinet shuffle. And I was looking for some different perspectives on what might be going on.
Right.
So I listened to your, I think it was a Friday broadcast, and I thought there were a number of things that you touched on that were, really struck a chord with me and I agreed with. And I thought, let's do a conversation. Let's talk about it.
Sure enough.
And since then, we read an article by Alastair Crooke, Alastair Crooke in Strategic Culture. And, he brought just a whole nother factor to it. You can find the link to this story in the show notes. It's called, Is the North Korea Deal a Stalking Horse for Trump's Mideast Makeover? And we're going to talk a little bit about that too. But Tom, for starters, just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then give us your take. Like, let's start off at a high view of what is going on. Why this sudden shift? 3 major cabinet members, shuffled around in one day, I guess.
Really? That
could have, really serious consequences. And give us your perspective on what you think is going on.
Okay. My background, formally, I'm actually trained as a chemist, but I'm a libertarian and I would say self-trained Austrian economist, and frankly, one of the better ones out there, because I understand not only the theory, but the practical applications of capital flow and how that interacts with politics and all of that. And so I write at Seeking Alpha. I write at Russia Insider. I have a blog over Gold, Goats, and which I call Gold, Goats, and Guns. And I've just over the course of time and analyzing markets and giving investment advice to people, because I used to write for, a newsletter for Newsmax, and don't hold that against me. They actually were allowed me to not to be my kind of hardcore libertarian self, which was kind of cool. And so in doing that, I had to really delve down into the nitty gritty of where politics and markets meet. And over time, if you're intellectually honest about what's happening in the world, then you can really only come to certain conclusions about what's actually happening, which is that we are dealing with a functional, very powerful oligarchy that is attempting a number of power plays around the world, from the European Union to the United States, to how they're going to isolate Russia, what they're going to do to China. And when you understand the big fight that's going on, then you can start drilling into the details and start looking at these little minor moves. Exactly. And make not just investment choices, but make good predictions about what's going to happen next in terms of geopolitics. And I don't want to pat myself on the back or anything, but I've been very successful using that interface when I would consider the non-aggression principle and the non-interventionist foreign policy proclivities of the libertarian right, using that as a filter to understand what's actually happening in the world. And it's worked very, very well. That when you mix that along with capital market analysis and what's happening at really at a functional level it becomes actually the world becomes very clear very quickly. So when we look at what's happening with Trump's cabinet, I say all that, and then I'm still a little confused. And because and this is something I do regularly on my YouTubes and my Periscopes, which is I will spin you scenarios. I will say, well, it could mean this, and it could mean this, and it could mean this. And then I'll do my best to kind of assign probabilities to those things, because at the end of the day, it's really all we can do, because we don't have perfect information. We're not inside these people's heads. And so the John Bolton, let's start with John Bolton.
Okay.
Because he's the most controversial figure. Now, Mike Pompeo is easy. Rex Tillerson was too much of a standard thinking diplomat. It's too much of he's just too much of a good old boy. Let's get a deal done. Everybody wins kind of, like ExxonMobil or not. That's the way deals are done at that level. Everybody wins. Let's negotiate.
Keep the trade flowing. Yeah.
Keep trade flowing, because actually at the end of the day, trade is what actually keeps the peace in the world.
Yeah.
And he's a negotiator, and and his word is his bond, and he's a freaking Eagle Scout. He's all those things. And Rex Tillerson isn't too hard to figure out. And Pompeo, removing him and moving Pompeo into that situation, I really think is because Trump feels he doesn't have any loyalists in his cabinet. That so many of the people that were in his first year cabinet were recommended to him by people he thought were on his side. People like John McCain, people like Reince Priebus, and the rest of the GOP leadership. They figure, he came in, I think, naively thinking that he'd won, and now the GOP is all going to come together. We're going to sing Kumbaya. We're going to reverse the 8 years of Obama, and on both a domestic and foreign policy level. And he comes in and he realizes, oh no, it's not even close to that. That the level of treachery that exists at the top of the American political system is much, much deeper, and the rot is much deeper than he thought. And all of these people betrayed him at multiple levels. And I think Pompeo, for all of his faults, and he has a number of them, is a loyalist. He will do whatever Trump asks him to do. And as Secretary of State, it's his job to implement Trump's art of the deal at the negotiating level, which Rex Tillerson wasn't willing to do. Rex wasn't willing to put on the crazy Ivan routine and push all in on North Korean nuclearization. If you think of things like think of the fact that at the end of the day, Trump is playing poker.
So Tillerson was a keep things calm guy.
Yeah, Tillerson is more in the poker analogy. Tillerson's more of a limit hold'em player, and Trump's more of a no limit hold'em player. Trump will push all in with a parachute of connectors or whatever, and a bad flop, and make it look like he's doing a flush. He's got a flush draw, and to try and beat your pair of aces that you're in the hole with, that you got in the hole, and Tillerson's more of a kind of steady as she goes. I'm going to beat you. I'm going to win through attrition. And if you play enough poker, you understand that's the fundamental difference between those games. One is a probability based game, and the other one is very much my cojones are bigger than yours.
Yeah, brinksmanship.
It's brinksmanship. And so Tillerson needed to be removed from that level. He could also have been removed because he's a closet globalist, like Gary Cohn. Gary Cohn's not a closet globalist. He's just an outright Goldman Sachs vampire squid globalist. That's also a potential interpretation of Rex Tillerson. And Trump is not a globalist, I don't believe. He is a nationalist for all of his faults. And so it may be that he needed those people gone, and he was getting rid of them and putting in people that were America first for all of their faults.
Or Trump first.
You could look at it that way.
Loyal,
Yeah, loyal to Trump and therefore loyal to America, because for all of his faults, and Donald Trump's personality defects are legion, I do believe that he's a patriot. My default position with him is that he's a patriot. He's not. That's not an act. When he's up there on stage. And so I said I'd start with Bolton, and I did all of everybody else first. But Bolton is that guy. He's also a patriot first. He's also a neocon and a crazed ideologue, and that's the problem.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with you on the patriot part, but
I think he is. I think he is. I think that his definition of patriotism and ours is completely different. Mm-hmm. Okay, and but I think John Bolton sees himself as a U.S. patriot. And remember, the villain never sees himself as a bad guy. Yeah, yeah. And I really do believe that John Bolton's a villain. I mean, the only way this could be worse is if they just, pulled out Dick Cheney or Richard Pearl or Paul or Paul Wolfowitz or Or, hey, I think Rummy might need a job. Let's get him back. Let's get him back in the cabinet.
It feels a lot like that we've got Cheney back again and his gang.
It's close to that, but it's not. It's close to that. Cheney is definitely pulling strings behind the scene. Don't let anybody kid you.
Yeah, I mean, he's too quiet. That was something that always made me worried. Anyway.
No, you're absolutely right. When Dick Cheney's not speaking, that's when you should be worried, right?
Yeah. And Bolton is like him in the sense that he's supposedly, from what I hear, he's a very competent bureaucrat. He really knows how all the gears work, and he knows how to make things happen.
Yeah,
which is what Cheney was known for.
Oh yeah, Cheney defined. I mean, this is one thing I agree with guys like Adam Gingrich about and others, is that Cheney defined the role and the power of the chief of staff when he was Nixon's chief of staff back in the 70s, and Cheney's ability to marshal forces within the bureaucracy is very impressive. That's why he was effectively president for the 8 years that Bush the Lesser was, nominally held the job. But I think that Bolton will not contradict Trump. Mm-hmm. So I fundamentally believe, and this gets into the Alastair Crooke article that you referenced earlier, and it's something that I've been talking about actually with my good friend Halsey English on his show and on my blog for months, which is that I really do fundamentally believe that Putin, Trump, and possibly to a lesser extent Jinping, the Chinese premier, now Chinese dictator for life, have all discussed a grand bargain for peace in the Middle East. I do believe that. The question is whether they're going to be allowed to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what's happening right now. I've been operating under this principle for close to a year now. From the moment that Trump went to Saudi Arabia, dressed down the entire Arab community, publicly dressed them down in Riyadh. Literally told them, get your house in order. I mean, he was more blunt than that. That was misinterpreted by Mohammed bin Salman. It was misinterpreted. He that over aggressive jackass went nuts trying to isolate Qatar and use that to try and punish old enmities within the Gulf Cooperation Council. But I think it started there, and then his move to go to Israel, and that he went to his first foreign tour. He went to Italy, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. Those are the three places he went. He went to visit the Pope, Jerusalem, and Riyadh, the three centers of the three major world religions. Think about that. So from that moment, and he made major and pushed the ball forward by pushing each of those, the status quo in each of those areas. He pushed them. It's very Trump-like. He pushes. That's the whole art of the deal. Push for leverage. That's what moving the embassy to Jerusalem is all about. It's taking it off the table so that the Palestinians can't argue about it anymore, can't weasel out during a deal. We're taking that off the table. That's not part of the negotiations. I'm not saying I agree with any of this. This is just my interpretation. Okay?
These are just bargaining points. Yeah.
These are just bargaining points. And as you can see then, okay, if he's doing that, why is he doing that? And of course, you always have to ask the question, why? When you start asking those questions, you come to the same conclusions that myself and Alastair Crooke have come to, which is that they're working on a grand plan in the Middle East. It was Halsey English last year who put the thought in my head, actually right after the election, said, look, Iran is working on the missile technology. North Korea is working on the nuclear warhead, and they share information. Now, again, as Crooke pointed out in his article, that's the default position that Trump is operating under. He's even tweeted about it. I have an article from my blog back in August or September where he tweeted literally that. And I'm like, yep, see, I'm right. This is what he's operating under.
So you think that he has bought the premise that Iran and North Korea are collaborating. Mm-hmm. One builds the missiles, one builds the warheads, and then they're going to combine. Somehow
and then they're going to share. And then they're outsourcing to each other. Yeah, I say that they're outsourcing one half of the thing. The division of labor is a lovely thing, right? You do this job, I do that job. And that's why Trump is so angry about the Iran nuclear deal, because it allows Iran to get that technology from North Korea whenever they want after the deal sunsets or whatever, and then they can go ahead and build a nuclear weapon later. Even though Iran is demonstrably not working towards a nuclear weapon right now, but North Korea is really doing all the work for them. And so then they could spin up a nuclear weapon very quickly if they needed to.
I mean, is there evidence of that, though? Because they also say that, Iran is backing the Houthis in Yemen, which is, there's not really true. It's convenient. It's a convenient
course.
narrative, but it's not true as far as I know.
Unless they're moving weapons in through Oman, who's been studiously neutral throughout all of this. I don't really think that Iran has the capability of fighting two hot wars. They're fighting one in Syria right now. If you want, you really stop to think about this. But someone is providing the Houthis with ballistic missiles. But Iran is not interested in long-range nuclear missiles or ballistic missiles. They're not interested in bombing the United States. They only want ballistic missiles that can reach Israel, right?
Yeah, I don't want to divert us too much, but
Too far.
My understanding is they're old missiles that are re-engineered. So,
Yeah, I know. I'm not sure I believe any of this either. I'm just telling you what these people these are the operating principles that these people are operating under. And so because of that, that's where all of the policy leverage positions are coming from. And what I'm more worried about is not Iran and it's not North Korea. I'm actually more worried about the neoconservatives' push towards war with Russia. That's far more important to me because at this point, they've gone loony around the bend. Since March 1st, they've gone completely off the deep end in a way that we've never seen them before. The push for diplomatic destruction of diplomatic relations all across Europe over poisoning a former Russian spook that if Putin wanted him killed, he had him killed 8 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's a crazy story.
It's just silly. It really is silly. And the Nord Stream pipeline and everything about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and all of this stuff. I just literally got finished writing up an article. I put up on my blog not literally 25 minutes ago saying that the United States only negotiates when we're in a position of weakness. We don't negotiate. We don't talk to anybody when we feel we're in a position of strength.
Yeah, we just plow ahead.
So, when Putin says don't abrogate the ABM treaty and Dick Cheney laughs at him.
Yeah, I mean, he's been talking about this since 2005 around
2002. They started talks on this. We informed them the minute he came to power in 2000. We eventually, finally, did so in 2004, and he told them flat out at that moment in time, if you do this, we're going to do this.
So why are the neocons completely? Are they driving this anti-Russia?
Yes.
Okay.
It's their animating spirit. I mean,
all right, because on the left, I mean,
okay,
quote unquote left, air quotes here,
of course,
the resistance, the if you will, the Clinton wing of the party. I mean, they are just as rabid about it.
But they're also neocons. I mean, Clinton is a card-carrying neocon. Yeah. That's why she's not. That's why she's not president.
They're that hybrid neoliberal, neoconservative.
Yeah, they call them neoliberal cons or whatever. Yeah, but at the end of the day, they're really, because remember, the neocons are Trotskyites that go all the way back to Irving Kristol, Bill Kristol's dad. They're all Trotskyites that were thrown out of Russia and by Stalin, and then they infiltrated the Republican Party and through what's his name, Buckley. The Buckley wing of the Republican Party, they're neocons. It started back in the 50s. Justin Raimondo at antiwar.com has been writing about this for 20 years. He's absolutely right. He's the one that told us all 20 years ago that the neocons are the people you have to worry about. He's the one I think who actually coined the term.
And they seem to have come back into the Democratic Party in 2016, or anyway, I
think they were always there. Even under Obama, they were still there.
Yeah.
I think Obama didn't. Obama was a caretaker. I mean, and American presidents, for the most part, don't have much power. They're allowed to tinker at the edges of domestic policy, but foreign policy is firmly in the hands of those that actually wield power. And that's the way it's been. This is why they're so scared of Trump. This is why they've hounded Trump as hard as they have, is because he was willing to upset the foreign policy apple cart.
Right.
And they weren't sure that they had him, and they didn't own him. I mean, I don't understand. It's so obvious. I don't understand the left's why anybody would be willing to believe that there's collusion between him and the Russians. We've got prima facie evidence that there isn't. We've got prima facie evidence in the fact that he doesn't have a hotel in Moscow, even though he's been trying to build one for 15 years. Okay? We have prima facie evidence that they've lost their minds about outing themselves as the evil oligarchs and the evil. It's so obvious at this point that the collusion between the media and the intelligence agencies and everything else, they've all outed themselves in order to stop this man. Yeah,
the period of time right after the election, they clearly they weren't expecting him to win.
Nope.
They were caught off guard, and they were sloppy. They were very sloppy.
Terribly sloppy.
And completely off the rails. I've never seen anything like it in my life.
Me either. And I was, as a libertarian, I'm like, oh, good. This is the best thing that's ever happened. Even if Trump does nothing else except out these people. I mean, I saw a poll the other day that when you define the deep state as an unelected oligarchy that actually sets American policy, 74% of Americans believe in the deep state.
Yeah, I just saw that.
Okay. And when you stop to think about that, this vindicates me when I sit down to discuss this with people who, call me a conspiracy theorist, and they call you this, and I'm like, look, you're just denying reality.
Exactly.
To hear facts in front of you that you just are unwilling to deal with, and then you just chalk it up to something you don't want to get. So it's fine. If you want to engage in your confirmation bias all day long, that's fine. I'll just do so. Just stop drinking my whiskey. And
the funny thing is, they won't find it to be a conspiracy if you change your terminology to something like the national security state. Then they're like, oh yeah, all right, but
sure. So it's all about programming. It's all about, remember, so much of this is done in order to marginalize people through labeling and through the use of language and using people's image of themselves against their quote unquote political opponents.
Right.
When we have much more in common with each other than so many people think. I label myself an anarchist libertarian. Great, you label yourself whatever you do, and I'm a traditional conservative. But at the end of the day, none of us want a war with Russia.
Yeah, I mean, my next door neighbor is a conservative, So are some of my sibling or my extended family. We still probably 80% of the things we still agree on 80% of things in life, right? So
sure. Take care of your kids, secure your future. I mean, there's this, and I got news for you. So do Iranians, and so do Russians, and so do Hungarians, and so do Chinese, and so do North Koreans, and so do Bangladeshi. And I mean, people are people. It doesn't, none of this makes any sense, except if you're looking at it through the lens of people trying to secure unearned power and unearned wealth, what we economists call rent. Right, this rent-seeking class of
right.
The rent seekers, and Gary Cohn being the chief rent seeker. This is a man who was the architect of Greece's troubles with the EU by cooking their books to get him into the EU and then selling him into debt slavery to Germany.
I mean, Trump was very offensive to the elite class, and the elite class themselves have done nothing but prove how wrong they are about everything over the last several decades, particularly maybe the past two. And, they refuse to accept that because the status quo is fine for them. They've used their power to make things good for themselves. And I guess their view of the world. I mean, I think a lot of them do have a genuine ideas that they really think will be better for the most of the people in the world, let's say.
Sure.
But instead of I think 2016 was about, the power elites not being able to accept their failure.
Yes.
And instead of accepting their failure and making adjustments, they've decided that, maybe democracy is not such a good thing. And,
But we don't have democracy in this country. We have the false choice between two people, generally speaking, the false choice between two people who represent the exact same interest.
Yeah,
and for the most part, that's been the case in American presidential elections since Lincoln. Frankly.
Yeah, I probably didn't phrase that well. Basically, instead of accepting their own failure, they want to say everyone else is wrong, and everyone else is wrong. But unfortunately, they can vote, and they still have some power in this country. And whatever power that is, they would like to. They think that people are not worthy of it. And we should continue along on their path.
Yeah, no, and if you look at, and this is endemic across, this isn't just the United States, it's Europe is just as bad. When you have a man like Jean-Claude Juncker say that, when things get bad, you have to lie, and that there can be no democratic mandates against the European treaties. you realize that they're not interested in what we have to say. Look, democracy is fine as long as the outcome is what they want, and they're moving us in a particular direction. And then we can all, as long as we all vote the way we're supposed to vote, everything's fine. But the minute people vote the way they don't want them to vote, like 94% of Crimeans saying we want to be a part of Russia, as opposed to the shit show that is Kiev, who's been keeping us poor and destroying us and now is actually wants to send neo-Nazis in to wipe us out.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you put neo-Nazis in charge in Kiev. And they say, no, well, then no, that's an illegal vote. It's insane. And they don't want to, there's a reason why we don't want to have we don't want the democratic process to occur at the end of the Syrian civil war, because everybody knows that 75% or 80% of Syrians are going to vote for Assad because he saved the country from being given to ISIS and head chopping Wahhabi Salafists.
Yeah,
he himself may not be a great guy, but I mean, he's better than them.
And whatever moderate opposition there was, they were overwhelmed by the extremists, which happens in most revolutions. And
sure. And those extremists were stoked through American weapons.
Oh my gosh!
Because and this is what Benghazi is about. We can go. I mean, we can. I don't want to go there for today. Yeah, but to understand what's happening with Trump's war cabinet, I think there's one of two possibilities that are happening here. I think that Trump is playing a crazy Ivan. He is pushing through art of the deal type negotiations. He is pushing as hard as he can on every vector at this moment in time.
Is that the same as the madman strategy?
Yeah, it's kind of the madman strategy. He's pulling crazy. If you've ever read Tom Clancy's The Hunt for Red October, they talk about the crazy Ivan routine in the sub warfare, and that's really what this is coming from. Mm-hmm. Not that I think it's a great book or anything, and not that I recommend Tom Clancy. That book is pretty good. Everything else.
It's just a shortcut phrase, yeah.
So yeah, but crazy Ivan and so this is his opening gambit. This is his big push all in or whatever. At the same time, the neocons feeling very vulnerable at this moment in time since Putin unveiled all of these new weapons. Not that the military and intelligence agencies in the United States did not know about these weapon systems. They
had to.
That's why Mattis has never been trying to push for direct confrontation with Russia on any vector. Okay. But the neocons have been telling us for 20 years, we can win a war with Russia. Russia's weak.
Yeah, they still believe and depend on the supremacy, the global dominance of the military. Because everything that they do and think and plan hinges on that, right?
As I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day, who's very astute, he's one of my business partners. Well, he said the American competency in warfare at the military level is our logistical superiority, our ability to forward project. And logistics. That's how we won World War II. We out logistics everybody. We were able to simply because we weren't getting bombed. Right. Mm-hmm. So we've now taken that and just continue to press logistically around the world. And this is the Wolfowitz doctrine and the Brzezinski doctrine of continuing to put forward bases everywhere in order to have logistical control over the entire world. So that even if someone gets into a war with us, we can just overwhelm them with this by bringing materiel and troops to the point of contact, period. Now let's look at those weapons that Putin just unveiled. All of them, when you really stop to think about them, destroy our ability at a logistics level to bring material to bear, because they can literally wipe out our subfleet. They can wipe out our aircraft carriers in no time flat. These underwater nuclear powered drones are not about killing aircraft carriers. They're not about, or what they are about, impacting them into the shore and creating a 100-foot tidal wave to wipe out Washington, D.C. No, it's to go in and blow up a 200-mile radius and take out all the subs. Detonate it underwater and blow out the subs and destroy them. And once you start attacking the Americans' logistical superiority at a military level, now all of a sudden we are vulnerable. And that's what's got Mattis spooked. That's what has now the neocons spooked, because now they have to push for regime change in Russia as quickly as possible. They have to try and figure out how to stop a resurgent Russia from taking even more but having a bigger influence on the European gas market, which will then impact European politics. That's what they're so worried about. And this is why we're trying to push for war at the same there. So they're trying to push the war argument as quickly as they can in order to effectively cut Trump and Putin off at the pass before they can negotiate with anybody and start bringing their foundation for a Middle East peace plan to fruition. And I fundamentally believe that. And Netanyahu.
So it wouldn't just be a Middle East peace plan then. It would be a rapprochement too.
Korea, it first starts with North Korea, jumps to Iran. The minute North Korea is denuclearized, now you effectively denuclearize Iran. And now, once that happens, now the Israelis, now Putin and Trump can now sit down, discuss with the Israelis and the Saudis. Okay, so how are we going to secure everybody's future? Because everybody wants a secure future. The Israelis feel like they're under existential threat. The Saudis are under existential threat. The Iranians feel the exact same way. But the minute that starts to the nuclear weapons are off the table, and Russia can firmly guarantee Iran's behavior. The United States now has to guarantee Israel's behavior, and Russia has the counter weapons to tell everybody, oh, by the way, if anybody abrogates their deal, we wipe everybody out before you even have a chance to move. So who's got the hammer? Who's got, so Trump may, as I said earlier, Trump may be showing that he's on a big flush draw, but it doesn't matter because, Putin's got a better flush, or he's sitting on 4 aces, or, whatever it is. Right. And so that's the thing. Putin doesn't bluff.
See, that's what I hear. And
he doesn't bluff.
Yeah. He also is not suicidal though.
No, he's not. He's actually an amazingly humanist. And
I'm not so sure if these weapons are as catastrophic as they seem, or at least if all of them are. But I believe they're serious. But I'm more inclined to believe, and I've had some discussions with people who are more expert than me in military matters and foreign policy matters, who halfway agree with me. I mean, I think that since the end of the Cold War, I think when the whole Kosovo, Sarajevo, I think at that point in time, the Putin government, who came later actually, but the people who are allied with Putin, I guess you would call them, they're middle of the road, right? They're not really the pro-West, and they're not the hard right nationalists either. I think they understood that it was an existential threat for them. They were not going to be welcomed in to Europe. They weren't going to become part of NATO, and they were sold a bag of goods. Or you could say that the people on our side, the détente, rapprochement people, they lost. They just couldn't stay in power. They couldn't amass enough power to bring that through, which we're seeing again today. But I think since then, they have felt an existential threat. And I think that with little resources and little power, they had to zero in on finding vulnerabilities. And they really only had to focus on one or two foes. And I think it's likely that they have identified some really serious
deficiencies.
Yeah. And I think that, I think a lot of them are around our Navy. Yeah.
Yeah. 2 areas. One is electronic warfare.
Yes, exactly.
The Russians are light years ahead of us in terms of electronic warfare and in terms of electronic warfare logistics. I read a great article recently about that, the fact that the Russian army integrates electronic warfare at every level, down to the squad level. It's not a separate part of it's not a separate unit. It's not like they have a squad of EW guys and then the regular infantry. So no, it's that everybody is trained and everybody has those weapons at every level. And so it's been integrated to every level of the Russian military strategy. And that's why they were so successful in Ukraine, neutralizing the troops that were on Crimea. That's why they were able to take over Crimea without a shot being fired, because before the Ukrainian army that was there knew what was happening, they were already surrounded and neutralized without a shot being fired. That's what we're angry about, by the way. Oh, that the USS Donald Cook had a battalion had Marines ready to take Sevastopol, and they got painted with a Bastion shore defense system radar.
But I'm still wondering what happened to the guided missile destroyers.
There's them. I'm more worried about this whole what we've proven, what the Russians have proven is that missile defense doesn't work. The Houthis just attacked the Saudis last night or the night before, and the Israeli Iron Dome system went off because somebody was shooting a gun in the air, shooting an AK-47 in the air.
I missed that news, but I did see the Patriot missiles that
they couldn't actually hit anything.
That one that did a complete U-turn.
Yeah,
I'd like to hear from some experts about whether that was like a propulsion or steering failure,
right? Or
was it an electronic targeting, signal failure,
right?
Or was that sabotaged? I don't know.
It's all very possible. When Trump attacked al-Sharat, the airbase in Syria last year with the 59 Tomahawks, and only 23 of them hit their targets. News for you: they came in low. The Saker had a great article about this and explained what happened, and he just kind of went over the technology involved here. He said, "Look, there's only one conclusion you can draw: those missiles were hacked and they were sent off course, and that's that." And either the men who advised Trump, and this is then you get back into the Seymour Hersh article about what happened in the Situation Room. I don't know if you read that or not. Cy Hersh has
Which one is that?
He had an article out last year explaining what happened, what led to the decision to launch the missiles, that Trump immediately wanted to go. His military advisors eventually gave him the middle of the road approach, which was to launch some Tomahawks, knowing full well that the Russians would effectively intercept most of them and do no damage, and that you get to show that you're a tough guy without actually doing any real damage.
Mm-hmm.
It's starting World War III. And Trump's default position was that he was going to start World War III. I don't fundamentally believe that. But again, Trump's got so many personality defects. He has such a need to be the bully and to prove himself that it's what I'm worried about when you talking about this war cabinet and all these things that we're talking about. They all come back down to, is this all a big psyop being run to put Trump in a position where he can do nothing else except when Putin stands up to him and says no, that he has to go to war because he can't back down.
That is exactly my fear. Let's pivot to this article again real quick.
Sure.
So we're talking about Wikipedia calls it a think tank, but I thought it was an NGO, also the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, FDD. Mm-hmm. I think most people are kind of familiar with this. It's a neoconservative, either think tank or NGO. And they have apparently laid out a strategy for, like you talked about, let's call it a grand bargain. And it depends on ramping things up, using brinkmanship to the point where everyone fears war, like really fears war. And then at that point, they think that they're going to be able to get Iran to, what do they want from Iran? They want some major concessions. They want to get rid of the sunset clause, and they want them to get rid of their missile program, right? Mm-hmm. And then they want North Korea is supposed to back down on their nukes, dismantle their nuclear program. At that point, Saudi Arabia and Israel feel confident enough and less fearful, and they start making some concessions to the Palestinians. I'm not sure what the Saudis have to, what they're giving up. And then presumably North Korea and Iran get other benefits, economic benefits.
The Saudis, what the Saudis give up is their feeling that they have the right to interfere around the Middle East and use their money, which is rapidly dwindling, to foment regime change around the Middle East. That's what they're giving up. They're going to put themselves in a much more humble position. And they're giving up any effectively imperial ambitions and leading the Gulf Cooperation Council, being able to set the price of oil. That's the big one, right? And be able to, because effectively Trump also wants the ability, he wants to produce the marginal barrel of oil in the world. That marginal barrel of oil right now, which is the price setting. When I say marginal, I mean in the economic sense. So that's the price setting barrel of oil. The question is who's setting that price right now? I don't think that the United States is. I think it's Russia is actually setting that right now.
Not OPEC?
No, OPEC has to, because the Russians can ramp up production whenever they want. The Russians can go to 12 million barrels a day if they wanted to.
They've been, this is another topic. I know they've been talking to OPEC. There have been some non-OPEC meetings and all that. Yeah, I mean,
the Russian, the Putin's strategy is the exact opposite of Trump's. Trump is running the crazy Ivan routine, Putin is playing Dale Carnegie.
Yeah.
Let's make friends and influence people. You need a pipeline? Let's give you a pipeline. You need some missile defense systems? You need some 5th generation fighters? We can do that. What do you need? Let us craft a deal that where everybody wins. He's literally doing that while building a portfolio and a litany of war crimes that the United States is committing in Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine, here, there, and everywhere to bring to the UN Security Council eventually, which is why I think we're actually trying to push to get Russia removed from the Security Council. And if they do that, forget it, it's World War III.
Again?
That's what Nikki Haley is trying. That's part of what's going on now.
Samantha Power was working on a project like that too. And
I think I don't think anything like that has changed. And I think that's like that's the thing that comes next, because the United States, I guess, like I was saying earlier, we don't negotiate until we're losing. So when we're losing in Eastern Ghouta, what are we doing? We got Nikki Haley in there making an ass out of herself, or asking for a ceasefire, which they know the Russians are going to veto. We're looking for a ceasefire in Eastern Ghouta for 30 days. Why? So that they can resupply. So that we can drop people in. It's what we always do. We've been doing it in Syria since the day the Russians moved in. John Kerry would go in. He and Lavrov would sign a deal within 24 hours. The Syrian army was getting bombed by American fighters.
Sabotage, yeah.
And then it was sabotage immediately. The same thing in Ukraine. The whole Minsk II, the whole war, the whole stoppage of the war in Ukraine in like 2014 before the Minsk Accords in 2015. One, we're going into the Ukrainian winter, so they can't fight in the wintertime anyway. And if they really did want to fight, the Ukrainian army would have gotten overrun, because at that moment in time, the Donbass resistance was better armed than the Ukrainian army. And so
the Ukrainian army really didn't want to fight their own citizens either.
And they still don't. Poroshenko's had to deal with at least 1 or 2 serious assassination attempts from within his own military in the last month.
Yeah, we should go back and talk about Ukraine. That's another man. That is
it's awful.
Back to the FDD thing again. So that's, you have to read. It's much more complicated than that. But those are the bare bones of the supposed strategy, and it emphasizes that the end game is not war. The end game is but brinkmanship, extreme brinkmanship. Mm-hmm. Is the only thing that's going to make this deal come about. And, Alastair Crooke he buys this. I think he's agreeing with it. Well, maybe I don't actually know how much he agrees with it. It's a proposal.
It's a proposal. And I think the end of his article was the most telling. He just said, at least this is, if I remember correctly, and forgive me if I
can read the last paragraph if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's see if I can.
Okay.
My recollection is good.
Well, 2 paragraphs.
Sure.
He ends up with, peace in our time, maybe. But just to be clear, this is a highly risky project, understatement of the year, which may well lead instead to war. North Korea may call Trump and Pompeo's fire and fury bluff, leaving Washington without any off-ramp, except the very military action which the bluff is supposed to obviate. Iran may elect to ignore Pompeo, too. If it has learned to distrust America's word, Israel may fear Iran's conventional weapons as much or more so than Iran's non-existent nuclear warheads, and seek to entangle the U.S. in a war to destroy Iran, and thus preserve Israel's regional hegemony. And then there's the question of whether America is at present agreement capable. The unitive U.S. state is fragmented. For whom and for what does Trump speak? Can Trump give either North Korea or Iran any credible security guarantees in the event of some agreement? Would Congress cooperate? Would the covert state cooperate? Will Superhawk Pompeo remain loyal to Trump's vision? Will the neocons manipulate this process towards the conflicts that they seek to ignite? And then he quotes Elliot Cohen in The Atlantic has written of Pompeo.
Yeah, let's stop there because I've already covered that exact situation, that exact quote from Elliot Cohen in an article that I wrote, which I thought Cohen's article was complete nonsense. I'm like, never mind. But the essence of what he just said is so incredibly important because it's all of those things coming together at the same time. I don't agree with Elliot Cohen's assessment of Trump. I think it's I think that's wishful thinking on the part of a New York, bicoastal New York liberal. That's what I think. I think it's just part of the narrative. We need to continue the narrative that Trump is a subhuman. He's not a subhuman. That's horseshit. Any person who's attempting to build a grand coalition, a grand peace agreement in the Middle East is not subhuman. And anybody who argues from the position that your adversary is subhuman is a person whose opinion you shouldn't listen to, because he's obviously not thinking, and he's not being willing to engage his opponent with respect for his abilities.
It's ad hominem to the extreme.
It's purely ad hominem.
Yeah.
It's pure ad hominem attack. But everything else that was said up to that moment is absolutely the position that I'm in right now. I don't know who's got the upper hand.
Yeah.
And my only hope here is that Trump, Putin, and Jinping, I go back to what I said at the beginning, have already game planned all of this and have a way out of it, have a way to checkmate the neocons, for lack of a better term. Because I think it's all there. And here's the funny part.
Are you saying that Pompeo and Bolton are not neocons?
No, I am saying they're neocons.
Okay.
But I think that I think they're neoconservative in thinking. I don't think they're ideologues. Well, Bolton is. Bolton is an ideologue. But I think that Bolton was hired and Pompeo was promoted because they're loyal to Trump and America first and not to their ideology first. I do believe that. I think that's why Trump put them in place. I also believe that they were put in those positions to get rid of the people who were actually betraying Trump and the United States at the bureaucratic level underneath them. That the other people below them within the National Security Council, within Foggy Bottom, and just go and start truly clear people out. Because there's a lot of that. I think that let's not kid ourselves. The Hungarian embassy should have been cleaned out completely under Tillerson's watch, because it's completely in the control of George Soros. He owns the Hungarian embassy, the U.S. embassy. The U.S. ambassadorial staff in Hungary is owned and operated by George Soros, not by the United States government. Okay? That's what Viktor Orban is fighting tooth and nail in Hungary in order to maintain any semblance of Hungarian nationalism. Remember, Soros was his benefactor. I mean, these two men had an ideological falling out at some point, and Hungary is absolutely the next place to be color revolution.
Regime changed. Oh, yeah. Color revolution. Yeah.
And
I don't know a lot about.
It's not going to work. It's not going to work.
There's so much hyperbole about Soros that I tune out most of it. But But
Soros, David Brock, pick your poison, and it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. But that's Hungary. That's one.
Yeah, I know. It's a different issue. It's part of it, but it's not. But so we'll see. I use these things as triggers, right? I use these as like signals. If Pompeo starts cleaning out the Hungarian embassy, then I know where he stands on certain issues. It's like it's a weather gauge for me. If Bolton has come out and said flat out, I don't want war. He's changed his stance on a war with Iran, and all you Obamaites that are we're gonna get rid of you all. If that's the case, well, okay. I mean, again, we may not agree politically on this, but there's a functional group level of bureaucracy in the United States government that is, I fundamentally believe, traitorous to the United States. They work for the globalists first. They don't work for the United States, and they have to be cleaned out. And they're the ones actually doing most of the work to oppose Trump. And at some point, you have to prioritize. I think this is Trump's calculus. I prioritize Bolton's neocon craziness versus his desire to improve the situation in Washington, and hope that that's more important to him and the higher priority than. And then Trump is probably calculating that I can control Bolton on these other issues.
Well, even Obama acknowledged, he called them the foreign policy. I know Pat Lang over at his blog calls them the Borg, and I think didn't Obama call him the Blob, the foreign policy blob?
I'm not sure.
So this was in a big tell-all expose with Jeffrey Goldberg in the Atlantic. I think it was called the Obama Doctrine, and in it he basically fingers this permanent foreign policy establishment that drives or tries to drive everything. So he himself has acknowledged that too.
Yeah, and on the other side of it, you've got people on like the American Conservative and others that have acknowledged this exact same problem.
Yeah,
right.
very much.
I mean, let's not kid ourselves. The Koch brothers took over the Cato Institute years ago in order to move the line on foreign policy, in order to try and co-opt the libertarian party and the libertarian movement away from a non-interventionist foreign policy. This is why they took over Cato. It's why it's why they outed Murray Rothbard. It's why they did all this stuff. And the default foreign policy position of DC is neoconservatism. It's just everywhere. It's like, even for people who aren't particularly, that's just where they are. It's just where their headspace is at this point. It's what they've been inculcated in. It's what they've been marinated in their entire political careers. And so it's going to be very hard to change that, even if you can prove to them that they're wrong, even if they're not ideologues, right? Even if they're not like John Bolton and Dick Cheney and Bibi Netanyahu and the rest of them. If you're many of these people aren't ideologues. They're just, this is what they know. And then change is bad.
And
there's a lot of that. And there's a lot of that inertia that you have to overcome.
Change where we lose power is
right.
Bad. Yeah.
Yeah. And they equate the U.S. losing power on certain fronts as the U.S. losing. And this is part of Trump's personal defect. He always believes that he needs to win.
And with Brzezinski, if they're still all working on the Brzezinski doctrine, even Brzezinski, from my understanding, understood that there was only going to be an interim period of time when we could have global dominance. There'd be a sole superpower.
Right.
I mean, they knew, and this is back in, I don't know, when was it, late 90s?
Sure.
He thought maybe a decade. There was maybe a decade to work with. And Wes Clark talks about this. Anyway, we can't get too far into it,
but it still ties into all of this stuff because that's where the drive to all these things is coming from. That's where the animus is. And
before he died, Brzezinski, the last thing he wrote, he realized that time was over. That window had closed, and he actually shifted his strategy. So I don't understand, but is it the neocons are unwilling to let go of that interim period, right?
So many people. Well, yeah, because there's inertia. So how many people are making money off of it? How many careers are made off of this? How many? You still have people like. Well, I mean, John McCain is mostly out of the scene now, but you've got Lindsey Graham, you've got others, you've got who are just their default position is, punish Russia. They're still fighting the Cold War, and they can't let it go. And it's all this, I hate to paraphrase Oprah Winfrey and say, but you can't have peace until these people die off. In the same way that you can't get rid of racism in this country until a certain group of people die off, which is what she said, which is why she's not electable as president, by the way, because that quote will come back to haunt her. I think that, there's a certain level of just pure inertia, and that this is these people's ego form. It's who they are at their core, and they're not going to change it. And if they're winning, and if they're getting something out of the current system that's to their benefit, they're not going to change because they have no incentive to change. They have an incentive actually to fight any change, and that's where we are. And that's why turning this thing around is almost impossible. If Trump can do nothing else except explode it to a certain degree and just force so much of the stuff out into the open, he will have really done his job. I see him as a change agent. I see him as Loki. I don't see him as a builder, right? That's who's going to come after Trump later on after all this is finished. I think his job is to break this all apart.
He's the disruptor.
He has to be the disruptor, what Strauss and Howe called the great champion, right?
Yeah, but he could disrupt us right into World War III.
He could. But then again, he could also just be that guy who averts it, or World War III was already inevitable. And I think World War III already started. I just think that most of World War III started in 2013 after Putin got Obama to back down on invading Syria. I think it started then.
Yeah, I would agree with that to some extent.
And most of the war is hybrid. It's a hybrid war. It's not a hot war. There's some proxy wars, but most of it is financial. A lot of what's going on is a financial warfare. Mm-hmm. And it's a mix of sanctions and diplomatic maneuvering and all that. World War III is 4 years old. That's why Putin won with 76% of the vote the other day. It's why voter turnout in Russia was so high. And it's why none of the other opposition parties were ready to take power And because they understand that. It's why Angela Merkel's still in power in Germany. There's chaos coming. And
can't afford, yeah.
And you can't afford to change and give. You can't afford to give, even though, agree with them or not, even though at their heart, enough Germans at this point believe that alternative for Germany is right and that understanding immigration is wrong. We're not going to give the keys to the candy store during Brexit negotiations, during all of this stuff, and give it to unproven leaders. Yeah. And the fact that the Italians did it is important to understand that, because that's actually Italy is ground zero for what's going to happen in Europe. That's a different podcast.
Yeah, I heard some of that. I'd like to talk about that at some point too, but I know we're running out of time. So anything else before we wrap up? Anything else you want to talk about? I feel like this conversation, we only kind of scratched the surface, even though we spent an hour on it.
There's so much to talk about, because it's all intertwined. And at some level, just kind of going over all of the moving parts is valuable. Because there's so many moving parts. Actually,
let me just mention one other thing, because like you, I don't have a complete picture. I tend to take data points, dots, if you will, and try to decide if any of them are related and do they connect. And one of the things that is really bothering me about that, well, there are a lot of things really worrying me about this war cabinet shuffle, but one of them is what triggered it. What triggered this thing? And I'm still not completely convinced that Trump actually made these decisions. I'm not entirely confident that they weren't forced upon him. By whom exactly? I'm not sure. But, right before this, he did his surprise North Korea announcement of the North Korea talks, during which he worked mainly with the South Koreans, which I think is a good thing. But there were many people who freaked out about that. And then, his tariff announcement, and there was a freak out about that. He hired DeGenova, who was a controversial character, but, also a credible character in terms of his experience. And he was going right for, revenge for what happened after the election. And he was zeroing right in on the tops, the Comeys, the Brennans, the Clappers, the head of the DOJ, Loretta Lynch. Actually, he doesn't mention her name very much, but then we have the MBS visit. That was a big deal, and that was happening around the same time. We have the approaching Iran deal deadlines, right? And we also have the Syrian army clearing up that pocket outside of Damascus and heading for Daraa. They're heading for the Israeli border.
Right.
And so I'm thinking, are any of these, is this what pushed it? Like, why did it happen? When did it happen? Did he really make these choices? And so those are the dots that, and one more really big thing.
And then there's the Italian elections too. There's the fact that LIBOR is blowing out to the upside. That dollar funding liquidity is starting to dry up because the Fed has to raise interest rates to bail out U.S. pensions. I mean, this whole so much happening. It's not just Trump. As much as Trump invites our desire to focus on him, because he invites this, he wants us to focus on him. And again, this is part of his strategy. He attacks his opponents on every vector at all times. He goes after the media and this one and that one and everybody at the same time and keeps them off balance. It's how he plays his game. And he does it on purpose. He purposefully lies in public to sow discord on Twitter. He does it on purpose to highlight something that he thinks is important, get people talking about it, even though he quote unquote lied. Why? Because now everybody's talking about it. He does this on purpose. He's not without purpose. The chaos is planned. That he understands. Okay. All the other things that are happening around him at the same time are not under his control. And we want to see patterns because we're pattern seeing, tool using monkeys. We're really good at this. And sometimes it's like looking at stock charts. I tell people, don't draw lines on your stock charts because you're looking for structures that aren't there, and they're all post hoc anyway, so they don't really mean anything. There's times when you have to just sit back and go, okay, what's under his control and what isn't? That's not what's happening in Syria. It's not under his control. What's happening in, and is he responding to it that way? Maybe. I think there are moments in time where he's gearing up for the big pushes. And he's really focused on the big things, North Korea and strategic arms talks with Putin. Those are the two big ones right now. And he needs to project as much strength as possible to go into those two negotiations. And he's willing to sit down and do that. And he's being told not to by the usual suspects to engage in either of those things. Why? Because they don't want him to cut deals, because they know he's got a weak hand. He does. You can project strength all you want, but he knows you're going into any negotiation over North Korea that the people who are pushing it are the Koreans.
Yeah.
Trump's just going to get credit for, look, Putin understands one thing. He understands how to allow his opponent to lose and save face. He did it to Obama in 2013 over the chemical weapons thing in Syria. He got Assad to give up his chemical weapons, which allowed Obama to back away from his red line and allowed Obama to save face. He's doing the same thing. Putin understands that in order for Trump to stay in power, he needs to keep his Democratic mandate. In order to keep his Democratic mandate, Trump needs to look strong. So the South Koreans are the ones pushing for reunification. That's why they elected Moon. The Korean people want reunification. The time has come. The neocons want to continue to encircle and project military logistical superiority around the world, because that's how they contain Russia and China. It's how they continue to sabotage any rapprochement between Russia and Japan over the Kuril Islands. It's how they don't want our troops removed from the demilitarized zone in Korea.
Right. They don't
want us there. They want Russia and China to still be at odds with each other over the Kuril Islands, because at some point, if there's a peace treaty signed in either of those two places, everything starts to change. Right. So he's going into these two very important negotiations with a weak hand, but he can come out looking like the big broker for peace. He gets to come out looking like the strong guy. He gets to come out looking like a leader, which is exactly what he needs to fight his intelligence agencies at home, who spent 15 years working against his own internal deep state and beating them. Vladimir Putin. Think about Putin's experience in beating his own deep state, his own oligarchy, his own fifth column, which he's still rooting out in the financials markets. You don't think that was part of their discussions? You don't think that's why they don't want he and Trump talking?
Huh.
Same thing with Jinping in China. Moving the Communist Party forward, so to change the dynamic of their economy from a mercantilist playbook. Which, I mean, like, the Chinese just let the Chinese run a mercantilist playbook for 15 years longer than it was supposed to, and they said, "Fine, you're going to give us the money, we're going to take it."
Yeah, that was amazing. I tell you,
it was amazing. So if you really stop to put this together, Putin, I see Putin's influence here as the ability here for Trump to win. But it's actually Putin doing all the hard work behind the scenes to lay the groundwork for all this. And then Trump gets to declare victory and leave. We're going to declare victory and leave in Syria. Okay, we are. We're gonna leave Syria. He made it clear at CPAC. Yes, because they're all pressuring, because there's still this pressuring of Iran thing. That's why we need logistical forward bases on the eastern part of Syria. We want to take over the oil fields and all that. Trump doesn't have any control over that at this point. I really don't think he does. But what he does, and so if you craft some kind of grand bargain in the Middle East, now all of a sudden he has the power domestically to shut up all of his opponents and now go one step further. Now think about the midterm elections here at home.
Right. I didn't add that in as a dot, but it's a big one.
Think about this. Do you remember a couple months ago, a poll came out saying Hillary Clinton's approval rating had dropped to 35%?
Yeah, okay.
I do. I immediately tweeted out 10 more points and she's indictable.
I saw that. I actually saw that. Yeah.
Somebody saw a tweet from me. Twitter doesn't allow any of my tweets to go anywhere. Yeah. So shadow man, that's not funny. But I said 10 more points and she's indictable. And I've been operating under this principle for a while. And in order to actually attack Hillary Clinton and actually go after her, first public opinion has to turn on her to a point where there can't be a riot. No one is ever going after Obama for his crimes. Okay. It's not happening. Whatever part he played in her email server or any of the stuff, Benghazi, any of the stuff, he's not.
I don't think Hillary either, because it's too. You can't put your election opponent in jail. I mean,
well, here's the thing. He's not going to do it. Think about where we are right now. If the Democrats can't raise money. And the Democrats, I'm operating under the assumption that the Democratic Party is facing existential threat this fall.
The DNC is in pretty good trouble.
And and the DNC is certainly in trouble. The Democratic Party is certainly in trouble because, as I think you well understand, the coalition, the traditional Democratic coalition, is fractured. It's completely fractured. So I'm not saying that the Republican Party is in great shape either. That is not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is, if the people behind the Democratic Party or the oligarchy wants to have a functional Democratic Party, then the way for them to regain any semblance of credibility at this point in time is to give up Hillary. Why are they going after Facebook right now? Facebook is the pillar of the oligarchy. It's the pillar of the panopticon, for Christ's sake. It's what was supposed to win Hillary the election, and it didn't work. I mean, there's all of these options. There's all of these things that are happening right now, and I almost feel like, and I firmly believe that Hillary's cleaning up loose ends relative to the dossier and all this other stuff that's going on. But there comes a point where she's a liability for them to get reelected. She shat the bed so badly in India 2 weeks ago that I think that there's some coincidence here between her with. She might get to that point where she's such a liability that, okay, we can now let her go. And
there's an old guard problem, and definitely there's a fight to the death almost of, the Democratic establishment not wanting to let go of power, and a lot of other people saying, it's time. They're complete and total failures. But it's their donors that's who's calling the shots in the Democratic Party right now.
And that's my point, is that they see that continuing to back Hillary is now a liability as opposed to an asset. Then they can let her go and they can offer her up as the sacrificial lamb along with Comey and a couple other people and everything else and end all this crap and go into the election with something tangible, because you cannot go into this midterm election, the third midterm election in a row, running on gun control and unrestricted immigration. I got news for you. It didn't work in 2010. It didn't work in 2014, and it's going to kill the party in 2018. Okay, I hate to give I despise the Democratic Party, but I hate to give you the playbook on how to save the party, but there it is. You have to.
We know that.
Yeah. So gun control is the dumbest.
Well, the Bernie wing of the party definitely knows that.
Yeah,
certainly
it's the biggest losing argument there is.
Yeah, so it's big trouble. Just like wanting to run Joe Biden and things like that. It's just,
oh my God,
it's crazy.
I mean, are you kidding? Biden's, but think about it. I look at the Democratic Party and I say, okay, who could come out of the Democratic Party for 2020 to come after Trump? If
Tulsi Gabbard,
maybe
Tulsi Gabbard, Nina Turner, Bernie Sanders.
Bernie's done. I hate to say it. I don't want to be mean, but Bernie selling out. It kills him. And Bernie,
the movement that Bernie Sanders stepped out in front of. Let's put it that way.
That movement is the left of center remnant of the Ron Paul movement, and Trump is the right of center remnant of the Ron Paul movement. Ron Paul started all this.
That's an interesting way to put it.
All of this. It was the awakening of the center, the silent majority in this country who did not want war, who did not want any of this stuff, who looked at all of this and said, this is not what we asked for. And it was, and I'll tell you, and I said, the minute he stood up to Rudy Giuliani in 2008, I said, that's a turning point in American history.
When who stood up to?
When Ron Paul stood up at the debate.
Okay.
Giuliani and explained blowback and all of that stuff. That's when everything changed. Everything, because look, the establishment never attacks down. First rule of politics: never attack down. You have everything to lose and nothing to gain. Giuliani was the front runner. He attacked Ron Paul at the bottom of the ranks. All that could happen there was, and Giuliani proved that he was nothing more than a cheap, authoritarian in an expensive suit, and he attacked down. And it changed everything, because at that moment, so many people went.
Well, the Democrats attack down all the time. They punch down all the time.
They shouldn't. They should never attack down. Hillary understands not to attack down. She refused to engage Bernie in any fundamental way. She always acted like the front runner. Hillary understands that point. She's a very good politician. She's a terrible candidate is her problem, because she's a terrible human being. And that eventually shows through.
Yeah, I wouldn't
And
disagree with
Donald
that.
Trump is not a great human being, but at the very least, hey, he's who he is, and we'll roll the dice with him because we know what we're getting with her. And that's that election in a nutshell. It comes down to it really does come down to that.
I think it does come down to that a lot. But the thing is, everything that he's showing, everything he's doing, I'm not talking about what he's saying, I'm talking about what he's doing, contradicts the things that he ran on.
I know. And that's so, not everything.
Was it complete horseshit or was it not? I mean, he was always an Iran war hawk, and he had John Bolton in his circle for a long time, and then in his transition team. So did he mean it?
I would say this. He was actually much of what he's attempted to do. And in some ways has succeeded. He has blown open the media and the collusion between the media and the intelligence agencies. That was actually point number one. He got tax cuts through a hostile GOP. Because remember, he doesn't have a real majority in the Senate. Paul Ryan's a Democrat. John McCain is a Democrat. Jeff Flake is a Democrat. I mean, Susan Murkowski, Democrat. Susan Collins, Democrat. Rhinos. They're called rhinos, but literally he's dealing with a Senate that is GOP in name only, GOP majority in name only. He doesn't have that. He has McConnell is terrible. When you start thinking in terms of our Congress, in terms of the uniparty,
the establishment,
the leadership of the both parties are in charge, and they serve the globalists or whomever you want to call them, the oligarchy, and everybody else doesn't matter. Goes along to get along and does what they need to do in order to get reelected, and then get paid off to get reelected. That's what he's fighting, and he's exposed that. So that's a net positive. He's exposed. He's gotten tax cuts through. What I would say is the most significant middle class tax cut in history. You can agree or disagree with points of it, but I'm okay with most of it. It's also the biggest political fuck you in the history of tax cuts, because it's designed to drain capital out of the states that voted against him. Very FDR-like, by the way. Meaning my home state of Florida, going to see a big influx of people over the course of the next 8 to 10 years because of just net tax migration. And
this migration's already happening.
Yeah,
we've lost 2 electoral votes in New Jersey. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean,
and they've gone to North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida mainly.
So, and then immigration. And
I'm not saying I agree with the tax bill.
No, I know you don't. But
I'm hearing you out. Yeah.
No, you don't have to agree with me on it. And I wouldn't expect you to agree with me on it.
That's not why we're talking anyway. We're not talking because we agree on everything.
Right. So when you start, and then the last thing I would say is that on immigration, Trump sees it for what it is, which is that it's a vote buying scheme. And that's why he wants to shut it down. And it's also a vector of the drug war. And he understands that at its core that so much of what the opioid crisis is in the United States is a function of his own government. And he doesn't, there's only one way to attack it. You've got to start it. You attack it by different means.
Are you talking about the trafficking or the legal drug trade?
I'm talking about the illegal trafficking.
Yeah,
remember, they're going after human trafficking. He's going after human trafficking, and he's going after, look, Afghanistan is a mess. We know when our eyes are open, we know what's going on. We know that our intelligence agencies run a global drug trade in order to finance regime change operations around the world. We know that this is what's happening. We know that we support regime change in other places around the world in order to foment large-scale migrations, in order to create chaos, this is what we've been doing. And at a certain level, that has to end. And Trump has spoken very passionately about this. And I firmly believe that this is what he's doing. That Mr. Potato Head that he's got as an attorney general has been working on that and ignoring everything else. And I'll give Sessions credit for that. And he also understands, I think, that you fundamentally change the judiciary in order to stop and that you have to kind of change the direction that we've been going at a foundational level. He's been working very hard on that as well. And a lot of the judicial appointments have been, if you're a constitutional constructionist, then you have to cheer what's been happening there as well. Again, you don't have to agree with me. This is the way I see it. And while my personal feeling on all of this is none of this is the world I want, it's just the world I got. And I'm trying to analyze it as best I can and hope that these things are positives. Now, there's a lot of negatives that go along with this, but I can see that he's attempting to make these things work.
I think what you're talking about is you're saying that a priority is an anti-corruption agenda.
Yeah.
Essentially. I think we can find common ground there.
Yeah.
I think our number one problem is just complete, and I don't expect completely corruption-free environment, right? That's never going to happen. No. But it's so far out of control.
Yes, it is.
Right now. I'm not sure. I think that the things are being put in place are the right things to do to go after that. But I do agree that an anti-corruption agenda is, it has to be at the core of everything that we do.
Yeah, it really.
Nobody seems to achieve that very well. I mean,
it's so hard because the systems themselves are designed to encourage corruption. You don't have to agree with the economics, but I encourage everybody I know to read. If you don't read the whole book, read just chapter 10 of The Road to Serfdom by F.A. Hayek. Ignore everything else. Just read chapter 10. Chapter 10 is called Why the Worst Get on Top. I talk about this in my Periscopes all the time. I talked about this. It's so very important. It's very short, 20 pages or so. And it's just a simple economic mechanistic argument as to why bad people are attracted to government positions and why fundamentally the idea of good governance is a struggle against the very things that we're talking about. Because simply put, in very broad terms, who's attracted to a job that allows you to lord it over and have power over other people? Those who like to do that, or those who don't want to do that? Right. Well, guess what? The sociopaths and the psychopaths are going to push themselves into those roles over time. And once you start corrupting other aspects of the society, then it helps the snowball just keeps rolling downhill. Then when you corrupt the money through central banking, the whole thing just explodes out of control really freaking quickly. And so, all that we've talked about today are all symptoms of a much deeper problem. And, we can have that discussion. I'm happy to have that discussion. I have that discussion every day practically. And I think that at a certain level, Trump is not ideologically driven. He's a very pragmatic guy. He's not ideologically driven. I'm ideologically driven. Okay. John Bolton is ideologically driven. That's why I don't want any power. Because you don't want to see what I would do with power, even though I don't believe that people should wield any. But I don't want that. We're not talking about what I want. We're talking about what's possible and what's probable. And I think that Trump, for all of his faults, and he has many, and I hope that I just hope that all of this is not a big psyop being run against him to put him into an ugly position, just like Alastair Crooke was talking about earlier, right? That if all of this is just all of these things that are happening.
No, it's not brinkmanship at all.
It's just pushing him to an inevitable conclusion based on his personality faults. That scares me.
Yeah, it's terrifying. It's also like highly likely. I think that's what makes it even more terrifying. If you believe what these guys have been saying for years now about what they want, which is a war, or they believe that's the only only path to get what they want is a war. And now they're saying, well, we don't really want a war. We just want brinkmanship. Which one, who should I believe?
Once you start saying all you want is brinksmanship, I have to call bullshit on it.
Yeah.
Because you're giving away your strategy. Well, okay, you're just bluffing. Fine. Show me your cards. Oh, no, you're not showing me your cards. Well, then what's the real story? Because I play enough strategy games to know what's happening here, and to know when that's not reality. I think that this is a very ugly. It's a very dangerous time, and the thing is that my big worry is that it's just unavoidable. When you reach a certain point in the economic cycle, and this is where we can kind of end this. When you reach a certain point in the economic cycle, and then therefore also the generational cycle and all of these, the psychology that goes along with that, when you reach that moment in history, Strauss and Howe call it a fourth turning. Some people call it a chondrite of winter. You can call it whatever you want. When you reach that point, it's all on autopilot. It's all just happening. And individuals can show up to affect the trajectory, how bad it's going to be, or how mild it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, but at the end of the day, we're going to have it. I think that the longer this stays as a hybrid proxy war and not a hot war between the Russians and the United States, the better it is.
Better off we are, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the best we can hope for the next, honestly, 10 to 15 years. Which makes it easy for people like us to talk about every day and get people to subscribe to our Patreons and all that. But it's tiring.
Yeah. And you have people like Pat Lang, who is a retired colonel, I think Green Beret and military intelligence, saying, this is an August 1914 moment. And he's not really an alarmist.
Right. No, he's not.
And yeah. All right. So let's do this again sometime.
I'd be happy to. You call whenever your schedule allows, or you think you got something that you in particular you want to talk to me about. I'm more than happy to do so. One of these days, I'll actually get my own podcast up and running, and and I'll do guests or whatever. But I don't have that right now. But I really enjoyed this. This is great.
And that's our show. Thank you for listening, and a special thank you to Tom Luongo. You can follow Tom on Twitter at TFL1728, on YouTube at Tom Luongo, and on steemit.com at Golds, Goats, and Guns. You can find Around the Empire at our website, aroundtheempire.com. We're independent media, and this podcast was brought to you with the help of our generous supporters. Become a patron at patreon.com/aroundtheempire, or use the donation link on our website. Also, please subscribe to us on YouTube, on iTunes and other podcast catcher apps. Those are free. And thanks again. We'll see you next time. Take care.